What's up, you guys? Welcome to The Imagination. I'm your host, Emma, and today I'm absolutely honored to introduce you all to ritualistic, religious, and child sexual abuse survivor and overcomer, social media whistleblower and content creator, therapist and educator, award-winning and renowned fashion designer, founder of Tarese, Estelle, Couture, and Birds with a Feather, plant parent, passionate speaker and writer, and an incredible DID system, sharing their story with the intent that others know they aren't alone and that hope is possible. Tarese Estelle, or if you follow her on social media, Tarese Estelle & Co. A little bit about Tarese and what we will be discussing today. Born into the shadows in Sydney, Australia, then carried to the isolated strictures of Queensland, Tarese grew up as the eldest of 8 in a world sealed by rigid religious doctrine. Her family believed that they were part of the chosen, only 144,000 souls bound for heaven, while the rest of humanity languished in damnation. No birthdays, no Christmas, no play on the Sabbath, only rules, isolation, and heavy burdens placed on young shoulders. As a child, Tarese carried and took care of her siblings when her mother could not rise from her illness, her innocence guarded by dissociation that turned horrors into distant, flickering glimpses she viewed through a wooden fence. Those glimpses were fragments of unimaginable pain, abuse that stretched from early childhood, punishments that scarred her body and soul, a childhood stripped of joy and connection. Yet Terese survived by the sheer force of her inner resilience, separating herself from the trauma so she could keep breathing and keep moving forward. Adolescence arrived as a tornado. Depression came like a suffocating fog, anxiety like a relentless storm inside her chest, self-harm escalating to life-threatening extremes, to eating disorders, to further exploitation from the little bit of connection she had to the outside world. At 14, she ran away, dreaming of escape through the only value she believed she possessed. But light pierced the darkness. In 2009, at 18, Tarese stepped through the doors of Destiny Haven, a sanctuary of unconditional love where volunteers poured their hearts into healing broken women. There, she learned to name her emotions, to face the flashbacks she once dismissed as imagination. Art therapy unveiled truths long buried. Sewing awakened a dormant creativity. Birthdays once forgotten became celebrations of her existence. She discovered a God of grace, not judgment, and began weaving beauty from pain, transforming fabric into whimsical, ethereal gowns inspired by fairy tales she was never allowed to indulge in as a child. From there, her wings unfolded. She studied fashion design, launched incredible collections, collaborated with other renowned artists, was featured in iconic magazines, dressed icons, and created poignant campaigns. Runway shows, scholarships, ambassadorships, each step a defiant declaration. I am more than my scars. Today, Tarese stands as a beacon of hope and light, a warrioress whose scars are constellations guiding others home. She advocates fiercely for survivors, sharing her story to shatter stigmas, to ignite hope, and to prove that healing is not a destination, but a courageous, ongoing journey. Her gowns, flowing with lace and dreamlike grace, mirror her soul, delicate yet unbreakable, whimsical yet profound. Tarese embodies the truth we all need. You are never too broken to rise. Your pain does not define your ending. It forges your becoming. She is living proof that from the deepest wounds can emerge the most luminous light, inspiring every soul to claim their own rebirth. Her story whispers to every survivor, rise, shine, you were born for this. She's the living reminder that no matter how shattered the pieces, the human spirit can gather them, mend them with love and courage, and create something breathtakingly beautiful. Tarese didn't just survive. She transformed suffering into purpose, isolation into connection, and despair into defiant, radiant hope. And in doing so, she lights the way for everyone still walking through their own darkness. Her testimony is a testament that boldly states, you too can rise, you too can shine. Your story is still being written, and it is going to be extraordinary. So you guys, without further ado, please help me in welcoming today's guest of honor, overcomer and thriver, survivor and anti-child abuse advocate, walking miracle, voice for the voiceless, and a hungry Australian calling us to weave our own redemptive threads. The one, the only, Tarese, Estelle, and co. Tarese, it is so great to have you on today. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
I'm excited too. I'm really grateful to have you on. As soon as I found you on social media, I discovered you through TikTok. I was just blown away by the radiance that you projected after going through all these really hard things in your life and the accomplishments that you've had and just your overall message. It's rooted in hope and in joy and in healing. And I think you're just such an inspiration for survivors. And I'm really grateful to have you on. So I thought we'd start going back in time and maybe paint the picture of how you ended up in this cult environment that you were brought up into.
Yeah, that's a good question. So the group that we belonged to was a branch of the main Seventh-day Adventist church. So it's called the Seventh-day Adventist Reform Movement. So it was just kind of like a breakaway of that group. So it wasn't a very big group at all. And yeah, so my parents, so they got involved with that group in my early childhood. Now, this part of me doesn't have a ton of memories from before the age of like 6. So I don't remember life before the group. But so for me, it's pretty much, it's all, all I've known. So from what I'm aware, my biological father, discovered this group and got involved in it. Previously he'd gotten involved in a bunch of other different religions and looked at them, but then decided that this was the one and stuck with it, and then just went, 1,000% into it. And Mum, she just followed along because she thought it was the right thing to do. But yeah, so it's not like for my experience, our experience as a family, it's not like a multi-generational thing. But so from, I don't know, he just seemed to be a bit of an anomaly from everybody else in his side of the family. Like, he was the one who got really involved into religion. Their family, from as far as I'm aware, escaped from Europe when there was a war going on over there. So they just escaped in the middle of the night and then came over to Australia. But that's as much as I know from, back before that.
Did your father have a strict upbringing? Do you know?
Yeah, I really don't know. It's from what I've been told by him, he was more of a searching for the meaning of life. But I guess I really don't know. He didn't really talk a lot about his childhood at all, really, or much really to do it with life before the getting involved in the religion. So I really don't have much knowledge of his upbringing and childhood.
Yeah.
To be honest, I would like to know, but I just don't.
So for people who may never have heard of this type of religion, or even understand that certain religious doctrines can lead to a cult environment, depending on who's involved with it, and kind of the temperament and the belief system of the people that find these things. Could you talk a little bit about the one that you grew up in, about some of the belief systems, and what some of the religious doctrine was that was incorporated with it?
I don't know a ton about how, like, the split from the main Seventh-day Adventist church. Like, I do know that there was a prophet called Ellen White, and I know that there was a bit around that, and she was the one who started the movement, as far as I'm aware. But I don't know a ton about how it was how that separation happened. I think there was some differing beliefs, and there was a split, but I honestly just haven't ever felt the need to go into it and research that history, to be honest. But yeah, so in my experience, and I've thought about this a lot. Like, I don't know whether what as a family we experienced growing up was something that all church families experience, like whether it was the whole denomination, whether it was just parts of the denomination, like, maybe certain families or whatnot, or whether it was just our family in particular. So I don't, at this point, I really don't have any way of knowing how much of it was just our upbringing versus being across the entire organization, I suppose. But yeah, what I've come to realize is that it was definitely, I would consider it like a high control group. And I think, especially in our family, like, it ticked a lot of the descriptions of what a cult is, except for the fact it wasn't a big group. So, like, he would have been considered like the leader person, except it was our family. It wasn't like a massive group like a cult usually or often is, if that makes sense, where there's like a charismatic leader or whatnot. So their belief was that there was only like one chosen people. So they were the chosen people out of everyone in the world. All other denominations were basically, they were going to go to hell. But ours was the chosen people, and only 144,000 people in the world were going to go to heaven. And I remember one time, possibly in our teens, I remember asking one of our parents, like, how am I meant to guarantee if I can, if I'm going to be able to be one of those chosen 144,000 people? And they couldn't really give me an answer. So, even being part of that group was not going to be a guarantee that you were going to be guaranteed entry into heaven, which, was one of the ultimate goals, of going to heaven. So you just kind of had to do the right thing, try and make sure that you'd prayed for all your sins, asked for forgiveness or whatever, and hoped that it was enough. That was kind of like, it ranked you high enough on that list to be included as one of those. But ultimately, I just, in my teens, I ended up giving up because there was no guarantee that I was going to be some, like, you know what, if I'm going to go to hell, I'm going to go to hell. Too bad. So I laugh, but it's like, it wasn't really funny. It was just kind of like, it was, there was no guarantees. So there was no guaranteed hope that you could sort of hold on to. And because of that, I sort of just gave up and, was like, well, too bad. This is what it is. But in our family, it was quite strict. There was like a lot of rules that we had to follow. Just so many rules, around what we could wear. So, for like females, they had to wear dresses. It had to be below the knees. It couldn't be too form-fitting. Couldn't be too low. It couldn't be anything more than here. You couldn't wear pants or anything like that because they were considered boys' clothing. The women couldn't cut their hair short. And like the boys, they had to wear, like pants, just like typical like men's clothing. They had to keep their hair short. There seemed to be a lot more rules for females, to be honest, now that I think about it. Like, we couldn't wear makeup. We couldn't like dye our hair. So me wearing makeup and having dyed hair, I would be considered a backslider, so anyone who didn't follow the rules, who wasn't part of, let me say that again. So anyone who was part of the church who then started to, who might want to dye their hair or wear makeup or stuff, that would be considered a backslider, and you couldn't really talk to them, you couldn't really associate with them, and they'd be excluded from the group and the denomination. There were other rules as well, but being like a branch off the Seventh-day Adventist Church, they obviously kept Saturday as like the Sabbath day. So from like sundown Friday night to sundown Saturday night, it was considered like a Sabbath day. So you had to pre-cook everything. You had to like have all your baths and all that sort of stuff before the sun went down. And during that Sabbath day, you couldn't do any work. You couldn't do really any sort of play things really. Like it was just it was considered a rest day, but as a child, it was just like, there's all these things that we can't do, basically. Yeah. We started living in Sydney, but around age 6, we moved to Queensland, and it was about 4 hours from the nearest church. So even though we were part of this denomination, we were quite isolated after we moved to Queensland, until many years later when some families started moving. But yeah, it was just really just us for so many years. There was all these like health rules that we had to follow. Like we were strict vegans. We could only eat like 2 meals a day. So from what I was told, it was something to do with digestion, and your body doesn't digest food at nighttime. So we didn't really have dinner meals, you know. Yeah, so strict vegan, 2 meals a day. Couldn't have snacks. If you snacked, you would get punished. So yeah, that was kind of how I grew up. I thought it was normal, didn't know any different.
And you were the oldest of 8 siblings. Can you talk a little bit about, you ended up having to care for a lot of your siblings as a very young girl, on top of being in this very high control and strict environment. Can you talk a little bit about sort of the role that you played in your household as a child and the different ways that you were a caretaker?
Yeah, so yeah, I am the eldest of 8, so there's like 4 boys, 4 girls. Mum did do a lot of it for a while, but then I think as more and more kids came along, I was expected to help more and more. And there was a point where she got Ross River fever, and basically for her, it meant that she slept a lot. Like she was just so tired and exhausted all the time. She would just literally sleep all day. She couldn't do anything else. And so during that time, I had to, start to pick up some of more of the responsibility, around making meals, around, just trying to keep on top of stuff, just basic stuff, just so people could, so we could eat and all that sort of stuff. Yeah. So.
Wow, that's so much pressure for a young child to have on top of, or a young girl on top of having all of these sort of rules and restrictions that you have to remember that are enforced on you, and that if you don't abide by, there's punishment with the disobedience. It's not, and you hear about this a lot, like whenever I talk to survivors who come out of the LDS church, or even some of these bigger religious groups that practice, there's these very bizarre type punishments that are sort of in place to penalize the person who doesn't abide by these really kind of wacky restrictions that are in place. Can you talk a little bit about that aspect, and what these punishments were like, and what types of things would elicit a punishment?
Yeah, so punishment was definitely physical. There was a lot of physical punishment. So, you would like get hit, so they'd call it smacking, but really in hindsight, it was it was them beating, basically. So, they'd take us into, I should say he was the main punisher. So he would like take us into like his bedroom, and he would, like flip us over his knee, especially this was more so when we were younger. He would flip us over his knee and just like we would have to have like a bare bum, and like he would then just give us however many punishments. It could be with wooden spoons, but once all the wooden spoons got broken, he then moved to like irrigation pipe, so like a thin irrigation pipe, because it wouldn't break, and that thing hurts. Let me tell you, that thing hurts. And so like the reason that he would like make sure that we had a bare butt was so that there'd be nothing, to stop or protect us from feeling it. And that continued up into teens. Obviously once we got a little bit older, like we were too big to sort of, for him to flip over on it, like on his lap and stuff. So he would just, hold us so he couldn't run away. And and I think the hardest part for me was maybe not necessarily getting it, like the punishments myself, but hearing like my siblings, yes, getting the punishment has an effect on you and whatnot because it creates fear and stuff. But I think some of the images or sounds that sort of just got burned into my brain were around hearing, some of my younger siblings just, screaming and crying, and there was literally nothing I could do about it. And I just, I felt so helpless because like I knew that I couldn't stop it. And, even if I tried, I would then get into trouble too. So, there's times I remember just hiding behind, a mattress and hiding under my bed, just wanting it to be over because, just the sounds of the screams of them, it burns into your brain, and you like, to this day, I still haven't forgotten it. So, but there's just, I don't know, there was, even within that, there was just like different variations of, like you'd have to be the one who had to go and find this, this stick was basically what it got called. He also used like his belts, like kettle cord, like just all different, anything that wouldn't break. And if you were too slow in going and getting the cord, if you're too slow in getting the stick, like the amount of smacks that you were going to get would increase. So he'd start with like a certain amount, like you're going to get 12 or whatever. And then if you're too slow in going and finding it, we couldn't find it, because obviously you don't want to find it because that means it's going to happen sooner. I'd be like, okay, you're getting 12, you're getting 14, you're getting 20, so it was just, a lot of physical stuff like that.
What did a typical day look like? Did you have a very rigid schedule as well as these rules? Did you go to school, or what did kind of a typical weekday look like for you?
It started off a lot stricter, but it started stricter. So I think especially in the beginning and before Mum had, Ross River, it was a lot more structured. So like we'd get up, we'd have breakfast, and there were like rules around how far apart you could have your meals. So the meals had to be at least 6 hours apart. You couldn't have like drinks for like half an hour before you ate or an hour after. You couldn't mix fruit and vegetables. There's a lot of just random rules like that. But so we'd have breakfast, and then we were also homeschooled as well. I was homeschooled up until halfway through grade 10 when I started going to school. But before that, we'd just do our school at home and stuff. And and then have lunch. And I don't really remember a lot of how the structure was. I just remember that it was a lot more strict in the early days. And then, once Mum got Ross River and like just more stuff happened, it got a little bit more lax. It did get a little bit more lax. but also, like, some of the things that like we did enjoy doing was going exploring. We lived in like 100 acres. It was about an hour out of town, so not in town, so you didn't have like too many people close by that you could sort of go and hang out with, whatever. So we would just go exploring on the property and swimming, all that, just kid stuff, climbing trees. Maybe most kids don't enjoy going and hunting for bugs and snakes and scorpions and yabbies, but that's what we did. Lizards. Yeah.
How many other people were in this group?
So for those, it was quite a few years. I'm going to say maybe 8 years, maybe. It was just us up in that area. So it was just us, there was no other church members that were really around. So a couple times a year we'd go down to Brisbane to the church down there and have services and just meet up with people. And then most years we'd go down to Sydney for a church camp, and that's where it's just like a camp, like a church camp. They'd have like meetings throughout the day, like the kids would have like their own kids activities and stuff. And I guess it's sort of like a conference, maybe. I don't really know how else to describe it, but like a church, like just a church camp. I don't know, do other people have them? I don't know. But they'd go for, I'm going to say roughly a week, give or take. And we just all, spend that week together, have breakfast, lunch together. And
So really it was sort of like you were in a container on your own property. You guys were pretty isolated from the rest of the world. You weren't really associating with the outside world, especially because everything you did was at home, school included. And then you would meet up with other people who were involved in the same kind of religious doctrine and high control groups. Certain times a year, you'd get to see other people, whether it be like at church or at these church camps.
Yeah. So we were really socially isolated, especially because we didn't go to school and we weren't associating with any other like local homeschooling groups or anything like that, which I know a lot of homeschooling groups do. So we just none of us had the ability, none of us had the opportunity to be able to develop like socially. A lot of people, most kids have like that opportunity when they go to school or whatnot, or even if they are homeschooled, they'll have interactions with other groups so they can just develop social skills and stuff. And it was something that we just had no chance to. So it was very, very isolated. They didn't believe in like sending us to school because they thought that the education system was just rubbish. And they told us that the system that we were using for like homeschooling and stuff was a couple of grades higher than what everyone else was. So we were kind of led to believe that we were more advanced, than other kids our age. And we're all also taught that you couldn't associate with anyone who was not part of the church. So because they were all considered worldly, and you didn't want to associate yourself with anyone worldly because it was just something we couldn't do. So all those rules just sort of, it kept you really separated from anyone and being able to connect with anyone or even really trusting anyone. I remember in our teens, we had child protective services called on us by one of our grandparents, I think it was, because of the homeschooling. Like they believed that we weren't getting like a proper education and stuff. And so we had these two undercover like detectives, show up on our front doorstep. And I just remember being so petrified. Like I ran back to my room and I started praying. I'm like, please God, like just please protect us, please. I was terrified of these people. Like because of everything that I'd been told, I didn't realize that their role was to try and help. I considered them a threat. Was terrified that I was going to get taken or something bad was going to happen. So yeah, unfortunately, the way we were raised created such a distrust for anyone who was outside the family, outside of the religion, that it kind of made it like the idea that anyone outside our group could help didn't even cross my mind. Like it just never occurred to me.
Have you spoken with other members of the family outside of yours, outside of your immediate family, any brothers, sisters of your parents? And if so, what was sort of their take on what they thought was happening, or what was their response to it, or what was going through their mind watching your father and mother sort of isolate themselves into these groups?
I've briefly have so I really haven't done a lot of like connecting with family outside of our immediate family, but I do know that one of Dad's brothers, he saw the change in Dad, and he didn't like he disagreed with it, and I think he spoke up and kind of challenged him and was like, what are you doing? And there was a falling out, and so they didn't talk to each other again. So yeah, they at least one saw weird things that was happening and didn't agree with it, but then his strategy for dealing with conflict and stuff was to anyone who doesn't agree gets disconnected.
Yeah, which is really sad, because it sounds like he likely didn't grow up in a family that held values that matched what he ended up seeing as being something he wanted to take on as an adult. I can only imagine that would be hard as a family member to watch your son or your brother isolate and go this direction, especially having all these kids that are going to be brought up in this way. And that's so interesting too, that it was just so normal for you guys that it didn't even occur that there was a life outside of that there could be other beliefs that people had, that you could have other family that might understand that there's something dysfunctional with that. It was just so normalized. And I want to talk a little bit more about that. How did this impact you as a young girl? Looking back, of course, you didn't know your environment that there was anything wrong, but can you look back and see red flags of, okay, I was traumatized, or I was going through a really hard time. I can see that I maybe had some PTSD, or I felt alone or depressed. Have you been able to sort of see some of those patterns in hindsight now, looking back?
Yeah, definitely in hindsight. Didn't know it at the time. Didn't know what trauma was, apart from, really badly abused people, or people who've been in like car accidents and stuff. Like it didn't occur to me that, I could have, like any of us siblings could have fallen into that. Like no clue until years later. It wasn't until rehab that I got challenged on the idea. And even then it took time that, I just had no idea that what we'd experienced was so abnormal. Like I knew it was different. Like I knew it was just kind of like, yeah, our experience was different. But I don't think in those moments, like growing up, I didn't realize that it wasn't. Like we were painted as the people who were the chosen people, who were, God, like we were God's people, and we were the normal ones. Everyone else was like these worldly sinners who, if you associated with them, you too would then, kind of get tainted with that and end up, being excluded from the group or becoming a backslider or any of that. But yeah, there's just so many things that kind of really, I'm like, where do I even start? It gave us a really skewed view of the world, of, God, religion, of what attachment is, like healthy attachment, the abuse, the isolation, just not being allowed to develop like most children, like there was just so many things that then impacted, you know, how we developed or didn't develop, and really affected us later in life when we started to go out into, you know, the outside world, or even before that, actually, you know, in like teen years, and we can talk about that in a bit. But looking back, I can see how all of that stuff really impacted just impacted everything later on, and how it made the depression, the anxiety, and the self-harm and everything else that came later on make sense, you know, in the looking back. But I just didn't know that then, didn't have the words, didn't have the connection to do that, you know. And I think on top of, you know, all of that stuff, you know, there was sexual abuse as well, and that also really impacts how you navigate life and what you believe about yourself and what you believe about the world and your worth as well. Yeah.
Absolutely. And did the sexual abuse occur at home too?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it did. And there was also there was other people over the years as well.
That's so horrific. And I think one of the things we don't talk about more are the underlying effects of things that we see happening in many adults, whether it be addictions, whether it be eating disorders, whether it be anxiety and depression. We sort of just take those things for what they are and think, gosh, you know, that person's just depressed. We're not asking, how did this person become this depressed? Why do they have so much anxiety? It doesn't look like, you know, things in their life could possibly be that difficult or that bad right now. You know, they go to work and they have a family and or addiction, you know, wondering why somebody would just want to be addicted to substances. And we sort of like criminalize these people a little bit, and we pick them apart as if they're choosing these things off their own volition and will, and that they need to just get over it and stop it. And I think the underlying cause of so much of it is trauma. And we miss that, you know, even in a lot of these different therapies or these different rehab groups that people go to, or recovery groups. You know, I feel like that still is a missing thing. They're trying to really get rid of the symptomology without understanding the root cause. And I think it's fascinating how survivors are helping us come back to that and to ask questions of how somebody could get to where they are, and that they're likely not just choosing it because they just feel like it. And that healthy people that grew up in healthy environments, that feel healed, that feel good, they don't usually just pick up bottles of alcohol. They don't usually just develop bulimia. They don't usually, you know, do these unhealthy things. It's usually something that has been eating away at them for so long, and something that's been festering in them that later on ends up resurfacing in some way that they don't know how to cope with because they weren't taught how. And we're not really taught how, you know, just as a generality in society. We're not, at least I know, like even going to my own public schools, I was never taught about trauma, about healing trauma. Like that wasn't even a part of the conversation. But stranger danger was, like, you learn about predators, but you don't learn about how to protect yourself from them or how to heal from it, you know? So it's really interesting how you can look back and kind of see that and see how these things started to slowly manifest later on, teenage years and adult years, into greater issues.
Yeah. And it's like we talked about stranger danger, but really a lot of trauma and abuse and that happens from people we know.
Yes.
It's the highest place.
Right. Yeah. The majority of it is. And that's why it's like, it's also such a fallacy, because as a kid, then you're looking at all these strangers, you know, and pointing your finger at them, when in reality, the real predators are like the people that are closest to you and the people that have the most access to you and your trust, you know. And you see it in situations like yours and other abuse survivors. You know, you rarely hear that it's kind of this Hollywood event where a predator comes out from a dark alleyway and kidnaps somebody and, you know, abuses them. That does happen. But like you said, the majority is in an environment that the child usually feels safe in, with people the child feels safe with, you know, and people that the child trusts. And so it's really sad just how uneducated we are, and how, kids don't even have the ability to see things for what they are. It just becomes normalized, these types of traumas.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that we were never taught was how to think for ourselves. I think it was really ingrained in us that, you couldn't question your elders. Like anything that you said to ask questions or to, kind of go, I don't know if I want to do that. Anything like just like, even if there wasn't an ill intent towards it, was considered back chatting. Like you had to obey your elders. Like you had to do what they said. And there was, there was never a time where you were allowed to actually question what they said. There was never a time where you were actually allowed to say no, unless, it was from an outside, people outside the church and stuff like that. You were taught to say no and whatnot, but within the church, parents, you couldn't. Like anyone older than us, we had to call brother or sister, so anyone who, you'd have to call them brother X or brother or sister X, insert their last name here. Like you didn't just call them by their first names, which was, I don't really understand that to this day, but yeah, it was just this weird thing. You couldn't call them by their first names. Like if I was still there, they'd have to call me Sister Estelle, but yeah, going back to, I get sidetracked very easy. Yeah, just going back to just not being taught to not question, to not think for yourself, not have any opinions. And I think, unfortunately, that sets you up, or sets any survivor up, really, for perpetrators to then easily take advantage of that later in life. So it's not just within the group. Like once you leave the group, it's not like it's over. Like unless you do some work around that, like some serious work around that, you're vulnerable to any perpetrator, coming along and going, this is what you need to do, and you do it because you haven't learned to say no. You haven't learned what's okay and what's not okay for yourself. And it's just that I think there's a lot of perpetrators somehow just know, and they can pick up on that stuff, and unfortunately the cycle continues until people do the work. And you can actually do the work and get to a place where you can stop that cycle, but unless you do it, it keeps happening, which is really unfortunate.
Talk about holidays and birthdays.
Holidays and birthdays were never really celebrated. So we never had birthdays celebrated. I know for many years, I couldn't even tell you what age I was. I would have to go and ask mum, like, how old am I? Because if someone asked me how old I was, I'd be like, I don't know. And then I'd have to go and ask mum, and, that's how it was. So there was really just never any reason to keep track of our birthday, because for what? And it was the same with like things like Christmas or Easter or any of those holidays that are generally recognized in society. Like they weren't celebrated either. So like we didn't have like Christmas presents or anything like that. We were told that that sort of stuff would just make us selfish. So that's why we didn't have any birthday presents or Christmas presents or any of that sort of stuff. And we're like, okay, that's how it was. So what I've realized later in life is that it's made remembering stuff and the age, like having an association with age and when things have happened, has been really, really difficult. Like someone will ask me, okay, so what age do you think you were when that happened? And I'll be like, I don't know, because I was never given opportunities to associate age with a particular year or whatever, because a lot of people go to school, so they can associate, oh yeah, this age was when all this stuff happened. but for us, like not even having to go to school, all the years just kind of blended into one, and there was nothing to sort of distinguish what year was what. So it's made it tricky in, having to, like, I don't know, even going to the police, it made it kind of tricky when doing a report around one of like my abusers. I just had to give approximations because I couldn't. I had nothing. And unfortunately, it then doesn't give them a lot to go on because, like there's just, like, how are they meant to corroborate stuff or whatever with ages and stuff when I don't even know? Yeah.
Yeah, I can't even imagine how, challenging that would be as an adult to look back and to try to conceptualize a timeline of your life in any sort of way when that wasn't at all a focus of the structure that you grew up in. But in the real world, that's like everything. Everything's like dates and ages and years, right down to different documents that we have to sign. If you don't know your birthday, you can't even get a driver's license, and so having to sort of conceptualize all of those things must have been very bizarre for you to see how strong the affiliations with those things are in society, and to look at your life and be like, whoa, I grew up in such a different time and space than most children and people do.
Yeah. And because there was also not associations with anyone much at all, like there was not anyone who could corroborate stuff, like there was no one who could. And like I'm talking about like when I did this police report quite a few years ago, it just makes it so difficult because the police can't corroborate well, this is if they could even do anything anyway, but they just can't corroborate anything. There's no one to, confirm stuff. There's no one to, like, we didn't really go to the doctors very much at all. Probably only a couple times. Same with the dentist. They were very anti-doctors. They were very into natural medicine. So anytime we got like cuts or infections and stuff, they'd use stuff like poultices. So like potato poultice or onion poultice. Basically, they'd grind those up and stick it on the wound, cover it in like glad wrap and leave it overnight. Stuff like cayenne pepper on wounds and stuff, which that hurts. It really hurts. Just to stop bleeding and stuff, so they could avoid going to the doctors. There is a balance that you can walk, but I think our parents just took it so to the extreme. Like they were like the anti-vaxxers, like they were the anti-doctors at all. They would only take us to the doctors if it was something they couldn't fix themselves, like a broken bone, or if a child inhaled charcoal or something, like it was only in those events that they would actually, take us. And I suspect that it might have been also to try and protect themselves from any accountability or anything, because, if a child's got bruises on them from, you hitting them, then they're going to obviously have to make a report or something, and like abusers don't want that either. So I think it was also partly to maybe protect them on top of whatever other beliefs that they had around medicine and doctors and society.
So talk a little bit about, you had mentioned that eventually some of it started to lift. The rules and regulations that were so strict started to unwind a little bit and not be so extreme. And I know that you didn't celebrate birthdays, but approximately how old were you when that started to come undone a little bit? And what was that like?
I think that, again, timelines are hard for me.
Yeah.
But I suspect it was around the time when Mum just got really like tired and sick with Ross River that it fell apart a little bit then. just because she couldn't do the things that she normally could have around, with schooling and meals and all that sort of stuff. So it was still really strict for me until I left home, but it's just like within the things that we were doing, like meal times would shift around a bit, like they just weren't as strict. Or I noticed they got a lot more relaxed with certain things after I'd left home. But my experience, they were still really quite strict and isolated. But I think a little bit of the structure kind of disintegrated with mum getting really tired and stuff. So that's probably the most information I can really think, to be honest.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then if she can't uphold it, was your father working? Did he have a regular job out in society, or how did he maintain this property and land that he had?
So he worked from home. He had a electronics health business. Like he would make and sell like electronic health stuff, and also stuff like colloidal silver, sea minerals, that sort of stuff. And he would buy old houses, and then all of us would renovate them, and then he would rent them out. So there was a whole bunch of those that got done over the years as well. So I suspect maybe that was partly how he earned money as well.
Yeah, a little bit of real estate type, making money from that, and his health stuff that he was selling also. And he did that all at home. So you were really with both parents most of the time. Just your father would be working, leaving most of the responsibilities to your mom a lot of times. And your mom was too sick at some points to really uphold that whole lifestyle and belief system the way that it was intact whenever you were very, very young.
Yeah.
And so what were teenage years like? Because you definitely made some really bold moves very, very young. That to me just screamed, this girl is going through something so hard, she can't even cope with it. And she's, running away very young. And, you made a lot of really adult decisions at such a young age. What were your teenage years kind of like? Did your emotions start escalating once you could sort of start understanding things a little bit more? And what did that path look like for you?
I really didn't understand, I think, even during my teenage years, what was happening. I just knew that I was getting more and more unhappy. Like I just knew that I was really, really unhappy. I didn't know it was depression until, ages later. But yeah, depression sort of started to kick in probably, I'd say, from around 12 or 13. And that's probably when self-harm started to, somewhere in those early teen years was when self-harm started as well. But just the depression and the unhappiness just got so like increasingly darker and darker. And if someone had asked me what was wrong, I couldn't have told, like I couldn't tell you. I just knew that I just didn't want to be at home anymore. And that was the only thing I knew. And I think because later on we were diagnosed with like dissociative identity disorder. So amongst all of this, there were different parts who would be out. There were different parts who hold different memories as well. So in our system, there's a part that holds or has held like a lot of like the depression and the darkness. So for her, that's what she experienced. Like she couldn't tell you any, like most stuff that had happened. Like she just knew that she was just so dark and so heavy that the only way out that she felt like she could, like she had was to die. So, that complicates memory and stuff over the years as well. So yeah, teen years was something. Yeah. sometime in the teen years too, we discovered that chat rooms existed, like online. And we started just talking to people in chat rooms, which is kind of ironic considering how isolated we were from the rest of the world, but we're allowed to talk to people in chat rooms. There was just a lot of stuff growing up that just didn't make sense, because they might allow one thing, but then on the other hand, there'd be something that'd be so completely opposite that would like contradict what we'd been taught. So there was a lot of hypocrisy, really. So anyway, chat rooms, and that's when, you know, you encounter people, and you encounter some people who are not that great either, you know, like predators who are on there, and they will start talking to you, you know, inappropriately. And there was one point where we were allowed to go over to Western Australia for a church camp, and then afterwards we got to meet up with one of these couples who we'd met on the internet. And that's where, you know, they got me drunk, they got me playing like a game of truth or dare, none of those things which I'd ever played before, like done or played before. So, you know, had no clue. And, you know, eventually it led to them both, you know, just sleeping with me. And I just had to, you know, get on the plane, go back home. And I just didn't say anything. So, like, it's just bizarre that,
oh my gosh,
people, like the family would, like, they'd have so many rules around not talking to outside people, but they'll let me go to a church camp across the other side of Australia by myself and meet up with this couple from the internet. So, and sometime around there is when I, you know, actually, let me backtrack. There's a lot that happened in teens. I think it was around 14 maybe, 14, 15, somewhere around there, that decided to run away from home. So planned it, like saved up some money, secretly bought a box of hair dye, just tried to plan it out. You know, when we went to town one time with mum to get groceries, we planned it so that like we would dye our hair the night before, put scarf covering over it. Mum was like, why are you wearing this scarf pillowcase thing over your head? I'm like, oh, fashion. Do you know? I don't know. And she was kind of like, all right then. And so I went into town, and then while she was out shopping, we just got the bag that we'd packed, had bought stuff throughout the day secretly. That was like a pair of pants, which was scandalous. Do you know what a spaghetti top, which is also scandalous. Weren't allowed to wear any of those. And yeah, so I did that. Had the changed hair color, which is terrible, by the way. It was terrible hair dye. Tried to go bleach blonde. He went orange. It was not a good time. But yeah, so just disappeared. Just disappeared. Didn't say anything. Took the bag. We'd also booked a bus ticket secretly. So we got on this bus, went from Bundaberg all the way down to Sydney. And yeah, had some like food stashes in our bag as well. And our plan was basically just to try and meet some people and just sell our bodies, you know, sell ourselves and figure it out. But unfortunately, unfortunately, I don't really know. We decided to meet up with a person we had been talking to on the internet. She sort of realized what had happened, so she called the police. The police then came, got us, put us on a bus and sent us back. So that plan kind of got thwarted a little bit. So we're back to square one. And still didn't want to be at home. Was very, very, very unhappy that we'd been caught and sent back. And just from that moment, just kind of kept planning about how we were going to leave and whatnot. So it was not long after that we started going to school for the first time. And yeah, so started halfway through grade 10. It was like a private Christian private school, so not a huge school, but that was like, yeah, that was a shock to the system. So we did when we started going to school, we did move out and we stayed with this this family for a little bit, who also had kids who went to that school. So they were not part of like the main religious group, but they were part of the main Seventh-day Adventist church. So I don't know. I think my parents just realized that we were going to leave no matter what at some point. And so they decided, okay, we'll let us start going to school. Yeah. So from there on, it just kind of was, it was just a lot of things that happened. Like the family we were staying with, he ended up being abusive, not towards me, but he basically beat his partner up so badly she ended up in hospital. And so, you know, the next morning we ended up having, like, her and the kids that were there ended up having to move. And so we went and stayed at some other person's place, but they had like this renovated bus that we ended up staying in. And so then we went to there, and yeah, kind of just hopped between a few different places over the years. You know, ended up back home for a little bit, ended up staying with the teachers for a while. Yeah, it was, yeah, just a lot, just a few different places that we just ended up staying. And then like that was on top of, you know, starting school for the first time. So that in itself was like a whole shock to the system. I'd never been to school. Like starting halfway through grade 10 in itself adds a whole other layer of complication, because everyone's like made their friends, they've met each other and stuff. And I'm like this new kid who has no idea what she's doing, like doesn't know how to communicate, doesn't know how to talk. I can talk a lot better now, like, but back then I couldn't communicate. Like I had no idea. Like, and they would have like discussions and talk about stuff that, you know, they'd done or movies they'd watched or just common stuff that happens in society. You know, did you see this movie? Oh, do you remember this movie? Like whatever. And I was not allowed to watch any type of movies or listen to any. Yeah, I was not allowed to listen to or read or watch anything that was fictional. So no movies, nothing like that. It was all sort of like animal documentaries, David Attenborough, that sort of stuff. Or like for books, it was like biographies, autobiographies and stuff. Also, I wasn't allowed to listen to any pop music, or although I secretly did in my teen years. But like there was just a lot of stuff we couldn't listen to. Anything that had like drums, because drums were of the devil. I couldn't listen to anything like that. So when I went to school, I had no common ground with any of them. They'd be talking about stuff that most kids could relate to. And I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. So I just couldn't contribute to the conversation. I couldn't even make small talk because I had nothing to relate to. And yeah, it was really, really hard, because how do you relate to someone who's got such a different life experience, you know? And even socially, I just had no clue, because like that had years of being able to be social and talk with each other and have connections and know how to be a friend. I didn't know. I had no idea. And yes, I was like the quiet kid. I was so withdrawn, hung out with people, but spent most of the time just kind of listening and observing and seeing what they did, really. And yeah, going to school, I started failing because the system that we were using for homeschooling was really different to what it was like going to school. So I failed. I was failing. It was just so different. We hadn't done, like, I'd never done assignments before at home. And so I go to school and was given an assignment. I'm like, how the heck do I do this? Like, they eventually started trying to like get support and help and stuff, but it's a few times I was sat outside the office to do an assessment to try and put something in because I hadn't done it, didn't know how.
Did you have anybody witness you? I know we were just saying earlier, there's still to this day a lack of people who are trauma informed, including in schools, which is ironic. You know, people that work with children that could be going through these things at home, and most teachers have no idea what they're seeing when it comes to behavior issues and stuff. Did you have anybody that witnessed you that did see through the behavior issues or the failing or the withdrawnness, that noticed that maybe you were going through something at home?
I think there was like one or two teachers that saw something was wrong, but they just didn't necessarily know what to do. And prior to starting that school, they didn't have a school therapist or counselor or anything like that, but it was because, I'm pretty sure it was because of me and another student that they brought a therapist in. And so we then started seeing her. So she obviously could tell that something was wrong. I don't think she fully knew or was fully like trained in anything of like, that sort of high control sort of group situation. But she did her best, and that honestly left a really good impression on me, because that was kind of the first time someone had shown an interest, who cared. She may not have necessarily knew what she was doing or had gotten herself into, but I just remember how much she actually, cared and listened. And yeah, that kind of stuck with me.
Oh my gosh. It's amazing how something so simple can be so meaningful to a child who's had neglect or, isolation and hasn't received the proper love and had their needs met the way that they should have. And I think we take that for granted so much in society and in general, what these really how big small gestures can be to somebody who's gone through something, so my hope is people listen to that and, do what they may with it. But, you never know whose life you can change and who can remember you forever just by being a nice person and caring, even if you don't know what's wrong or what to do, or if you think or suspect somebody or a child is in trouble. It never hurts to just be there for them somehow and try to be a comfort, or to see them, even if it's, even for you were dissociated from a lot of what you were going through too. So even if somebody had asked you, you may not have even known how to respond, because there still wasn't that understanding of what you actually were in as a child.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was the thing, is I still couldn't really put words to what was wrong. Like, it's so hard to tell someone what's wrong when you don't really know what's wrong either. And going back to the point of, when you said how much, like, you don't know how much of a difference someone can make in your life. Like, there's been studies that have been done around people or children who have had at least like one safe person in their life versus none, who have gone through like childhood trauma and such. And even just one safe person could be a grandparent, could be a friend. It makes such a difference in the outcome of the child's trajectory. Like, it actually helps mitigate some of that, the effects of trauma, if they can have one safe space. And I think that's just so super powerful, and a really, really good reminder that you may think that the safe space and connection that you're offering isn't enough, but you just have no idea how much that's actually going to help that child actually long term.
And so for you also, at the same time that all this is going on, you had also began self-harming, and even so young, thought the way out of your situation was to prostitute yourself, to use your body to get out, which is so sad that that was the first thing that you thought of. It wasn't like, oh, how can I start like my own little business, or can I figure out a way that I can healthily make money? You immediately went to some of these really dark things that you could do. And then at the same time, you're harming yourself through various means. Can you talk a little bit about that aspect of it, and then also how you started to taper off from that, or how you got out of that?
The first times that I do remember self-harm, it was like literally just sitting in the bathtub, hitting my head against like my knee, and just over and over and over again. And it somehow felt like it helped. I didn't really know what self-harm was, didn't really know the term. Obviously, at some point over the years, I found out what it was. But yeah, it just felt like it took the edge off everything that was going on inside. It's like if we could make the physical external pain stronger than the internal pain, it kind of just felt like it helped for a while, because you don't really feel that internal pain as much when all you can feel is like this external pain. And so yeah, that's it. It started and just slowly progressively got worse. It went to burning. So like we've got scars on like our like arm here from burning. It tried a fair few things, to be honest, like hitting to the point where like my hand would be just so swollen that like it was just or like our knee or our foot would be just from repeatedly hitting, because when that pain was strong enough, it could forget about the internal pain for a little bit. And yeah, like obviously it went to cutting as well. And that's, as with anything that you become addicted to, it requires more and more and more to have like that, a similar effect. And yeah, it kind of just got to the point where like the self-harm increased over the years. I think there was a period where it stopped for a little bit, but then it picked back up again, and we would cut until there's times where we would pass out, or even just prior to going to rehab, we had to do like a blood test panel thing for all that stuff, and they got that back, and we ended up having to go into hospital for like blood transfusions, iron infusions, because we'd clearly lost enough blood for it to be pretty dangerous. But yeah, so, and I think like one of the things with any kind of thing that is addictive, so many people in the world think that everything like that is harmful. So whether it be drugs, alcohol, self-harm, whatever it looks like, eating disorder, but really it's actually been a way to help the child or the person survive. They've found something that has had a helpful benefit to it, aspect to it, and it's helped in a way that nothing else that they know how to do does. And I remember learning about it years later when I did my counseling course, And one of the instructors in one of the courses I did was talking about how different things help bring you back into that window of tolerance, like not in a healthy way really or long-term way, but it actually helps regulate the person's nervous system temporarily at least. And that's why people keep doing it, because it helps with their nervous system somehow. Yeah. I mean, obviously it always comes with like negative side effects, so that's why it's like it's not a healthy thing to do to regulate your nervous system. But yeah, it's just really interesting that all of those things have some type of benefit in terms of helping the child survive. But yeah, that was like the self-harm side of it. There were times where parts would try and break bones or whatever, unsuccessfully, thankfully. But yeah, and overdosing also started to happen during teen years. I do remember the first time that some part in our system decided to overdose. They only took like a few pills. It was not going to do anything, but didn't know that at the time. So then other parts were like, please God, please, like, I'm so sorry. I'll like, if I survive this, I'll never do this again. Like we're just desperate to like, oh my gosh, what the heck have I done? What has this part done? But of course, nothing happened. And then the parts would overdose again. And, then those amounts got more and more and more until, there were times it landed us in, intensive care. Yeah, there was many overdoses over quite a few years. And again, our therapist, the school therapist, when she finally got involved, she had to call ambulances on us a few times because we'd tell her that we'd overdosed. There was one time she actually came to the hospital and just sat with us in the emergency room while we're waiting to be seen and held our hand while, they had to put like needles into like an artery, which was like, it was excruciating. But she just held her hand and like, I just will never forget her kindness because she didn't have to be. It was outside school hours, but she chose to come and, sit with us and it just really meant something. It was, she couldn't fix our life. She couldn't do any of that, but she cared. And that meant a lot. Yeah. So
did your parents know that this was happening?
Yes, eventually. So like when we started up in hospital, yes. I really don't remember much really of what any of them. I can't even remember them during this period, to be honest, which is bizarre.
I just think it's so sad that a teacher was there holding your hand and not your family. It just shows like the lack of disconnect on how good you were at like concealing your pain and the things that you're going through, but also how disconnected, as much as they wanted to have this high control over your family, there was such a disconnect emotionally with their children, and having an awareness of what they're going through both at home and outside of home.
I wouldn't have wanted them there. Like none of the parts inside would have wanted them there anyway, to be honest. Like just didn't want them there at all. And
just so
there was one time, well, we didn't really know what good connection was or safe connection was.
Of course.
Or someone who really genuinely cared. Like I think that's why this counselor from school made such an impression, because she was kind of like the first person who was just there and didn't judge. Like obviously parts got mad when, she'd have to do things like call the police or do whatever, but that kindness and just that caring kind of, yeah, it made it okay for her to be there during that time. So, yeah.
Was that also conflicting for you to be going on these lows after growing up in an environment where you're told you're going to go to hell, you need to abide by these rules? Was there conflicting emotions with the belief system you grew up with versus some of the beliefs that your path led you to come to think was the best possible solution to survive?
Not consciously. I think at that point, I had given up on the idea that I was ever going to be a good Christian within this group. I think after having the conversation with my parents around, was there any guarantee that I could be part of this chosen 144,000, and realizing that, I don't have a guarantee. It was sort of after that I sort of just gave up on the idea and was like, well, I'm a backslider, I'm a sinner, I'm not going to go to heaven anyway, so why even try? But obviously, just because you give up doesn't mean that a lot of those deep-rooted beliefs and stuff are not there in other ways. So of course there would have been, that internal conflict with different parts and stuff, but it definitely wasn't conscious at that point. No, it's not conscious. So
at what point did those beliefs start to break down, and what inspired you to get help and to start to realize that some of these things actually weren't normal in your life?
That requires a little bit of a detour. Well, not really. It's all intertwined anyway. But yeah, like on top of all of that stuff, like there was like disordered eating, ended up in like a kid's psych ward, and discovered what, an eating disorder was, ended up in, that's a whole other world of disordered eating. Wouldn't wish it on anyone. But yeah, one of the things that started to get more involved in was just meeting guys and, just, yeah, sleeping with them or sleeping with them for money. Met a pimp guy, whatever you want to call him. And he started arranging people like for me to see, or like for our system to see. And yeah, so that happened. Also underage at the time, but so, and then there was also a point where like he assaulted and raped me as well. Like that was a terrifying night. But like he was a scary guy. Like I think looking back and from things that I've heard since, I'm pretty sure he was involved in like still is possibly organized abuse. Some of the things that he was saying, yeah, it was just a little scary. And I've often wondered whether this guy was involved in like stuff like ritual abuse and like just all that sort of stuff because of some of the things that he said to me that night. Because he asked if I'd be okay with killing someone. He asked there was just other stuff that now I know more about this world that just kind of gives me a whole bunch of red flags of how do you look, why are you even asking me that as an underage girl? Yeah, and I've just heard he's gotten his son off like charges and stuff like that, and that he knows a lot of people. I just really highly suspect that he actually was in some sort of organized abuse to some degree.
Oh my gosh, that's so horrifying. And to think that you're how much older than you? You were a minor. How old was he at that time?
Oh, he had to have been like maybe 50.
Oh my gosh. Were there other girls too, do you suspect, that he was also pimping out and arranging these clients with? Ugh.
I don't have proof,
Yeah.
but I suspected, like, just the way he conducted himself, like it was clear that, like, he knew what he was doing. This was not, it wasn't new for him. Just the way he went about it and was he knew how things worked. Like, there were times where he took us, like, me to other people, like, who were friends or whatever, including another older woman who was, like, she was like a spicy worker as well. I don't know what his connection was with her. Like, there was just a few different people. Like, yes, he would organize clients and stuff just from, like, in newspapers, putting me in newspapers and whatever. But there were also people that he would take me to that he had some sort of connection with. So I don't know what his connection was to them. I don't know, but I do suspect that there has to have been others. There has to have been others. I came to find out later that he was actually, and still is, part of a church. He was an elder in a church, and he still is part of a church, which I don't love the idea of. So
it's one of the ways it seems predators hide the easiest is by having that cover story. I'm a good churchgoer. I'm this great person. And so it goes against everybody's belief about that person that they could ever commit a crime behind the scenes or abuse somebody because of who they show up publicly as.
Yeah. He also works with like other, like, in a government position, who worked with, like, I don't know how you would exactly call it, but it's like Indigenous people, like, supporting with that. I don't know his role exactly, but I have since found out that that's sort of what he does as well. So I guess, yeah, just like different populations that could quite possibly be taken advantage of,
Oh my gosh. How did you get away from that situation?
Partly I just one day stopped talking to him. But I also ended up in rehab not long later. So it was during, like, this time that, I'd stopped going to school. I got a job in hospitality. I was seeing this like Centrelink caseworker, like job placement caseworker or something. Basically their role is to sort of support you to get employment or get more training or stuff like that. It's kind of like a caseworker, but he happened to be a really, really nice guy. Like, he's really a genuine person, safe person. And so he started to hear more about what was happening in my life and stuff. He saw some of the stuff that was, heard some of the stuff that was happening with this guy. He tried to go to the police, but he said that the police can't do anything unless I, made a report. He realized that this guy was actually an elder at the church that he was attending. And so, again, I didn't know this at the time, but I found out later, like years later, he told me more about it. And he was like, when I realized who this person was, because he confirmed when I gave this guy's number plate to him, and he was like, I know who this person is, and they had a lot to do with each other. So his world shattered, and yeah, they obviously parted ways and stuff, but yeah, he was the one who heard about Destiny Haven. He heard Janine and Lewis speak at some conference or event or something. So he'd heard about Destiny Haven, and he told me about Destiny Haven. So yeah, that's sort of how that all kind of ended. Because I was like, Yeah, I knew that if I'd kept going the way that I was going, obviously I would have either wouldn't have like ended life myself, or would have just, probably ended up back in that world that this guy was in, in some form or another. So either way, I knew life was not going to go well. So I wanted help. Tried getting into another place. They knocked me back, told me I needed to start going to church, and then maybe they'd consider me. And I was like,
Oh my gosh.
Thanks, but I need some more help than that.
Exactly.
So anyway, yeah, that's kind of, he told me this place. I applied, and 2 weeks later, I was out of Bundaberg and down in Newcastle and a rehab. Yeah, I didn't know if rehab was going to be the most helpful thing for me, or if it's going to be the right thing for me. I just knew that I was at the end of my rope. I didn't have any other options at that point that I knew about that I thought was going to be helpful. And so I took a risk. I was at the end of myself, and I knew that life was not going to go well if I didn't do something. And so when I was told about this place and I got accepted, I was like, you know what, I'm going to do it. I'm going to give it my best shot, because what else have I got to lose except for my life? So I took a risk. I quit my job. I packed up the place that I was staying at, and I got a plane ticket and flew down. And truly, I had no idea what it was going to be like. I had no idea what to expect, except I was holding on to this little piece of hope. I was just holding on to, maybe this is going to help. Maybe this is going to get, like, maybe life can be better. Like, I couldn't see how. I didn't know how, but I was like, if there's hope out there, I'm going to try for it and give it my best shot and see where this little thread of hope takes me. And that thread of hope many years later has landed me here, and is a big reason why I'm still here today and alive today.
And it's such a miracle that you are here and that we get to learn from you. And I know we're just sort of scratching the surface on your recovery journey, and I can't wait to have you back on so we can really dive into that and into your career path, because it's amazing how you were able to transmute so much pain and confusion into something that was so positive and provided such a beautiful sort of outlet for other people to see and to experience, and something that you thrived on. And I'm really excited to get into that. But before we close up for today, I wanted to see, what words do you have for survivors who are going through a really hard time themselves, or are just sort of waking up to the fact that they went through something really hard as kids or even as adults, and they're trying to cope with that trauma, and maybe in that dark point that you were in your life going through before you chose to go to rehab and begin your own healing journey?
I know that there's still so many people who have gone through or are going through things that are similar to maybe what, I've experienced or what our system has experienced. And it can be really hard in those moments, like when you're in the midst of it, and it's like, is change possible? Is there hope possible? And I want to encourage you that, there is, like, it's things can change. I'm not saying it's quick. I'm not saying it's easy by any means, but I just really want to encourage people that, like, they're not alone. Like, your experiences, yes, they're unique to you, but there are other people who have been through things that you have as well. And there's a lot more of us out there. And I just hope that, like, my story can help encourage you in some way. And I know we haven't yet talked about a lot of the good things that have happened, and there has been a lot of good things that happen. So please come back for part 2, because there is hope. But I just hope that my story can also be some sort of encouragement, because I know for myself and our system, when we were in those dark times, we used to try and read stories of people who had similar stories just to see if they had, recovered, or if there was any hope in there that we could hold on to for ourselves. And we were so desperate to hear other people's stories that were similar to ours. And I think that's one of the reasons that, like, we keep sharing our story, is because we remember what it was like and how much we tried to find other people whose stories were similar, and how much it meant when we could find people who a little bit of stories would align. So we share for the people who might not feel like they've had their story seen or heard, or might need a little bit of something just to grasp hold on to for themselves as well. So, yeah.
Thank you for being such a light in the darkness. I think that's such an important thing for survivors to see, because especially if you don't have context or understanding or education or help to get through what you're going through, there's not a light at the end of the tunnel. You can't even conceptualize it because you don't even know what you went through. And so everything's just so black and consuming and isolating. And, it's so easy to feel I'm the only one who's going through this, when we're in a society like how you felt so misplaced in school. So many people are feeling that awkwardness and that I don't belong in life, when in fact, that's so common that so many people that are even, that we pass every day are going through really hard things, and we don't know. Like, we're far from alone. And if we all talked about our trauma more, we'd realize how not alone we actually are, that it's like really the common thread that bonds all of us actually. And so I'm so grateful that you decided to share your story, because it really is amazing how you've come out on the other end. And we didn't even get to talk about your career and just the incredible gowns that you've designed, and the ways that you've been able to be successful with that, and magazines and people that you've worked with, and all the other things that you do, your advocacy, your therapy that you do. And but one way people can keep in touch with you and learn a little bit more about it before we do our part 2 is you're very active on social media, and we're really grateful for that, because you do a lot of education. You give hope every day on these posts, and some of them are kind of funny. I watched a post where you had put out something about this big poofy kind of orange dress that and you were getting feedback and just laughing at it. And I loved that you could like be in that position of accepting those things and like being able to laugh about it, so it's really, I love your social media. It can be serious, you can have serious conversations, but you're also on there having fun too. So I want you to just talk a little bit about where people can find you, and if you want to share anything about your social media or your YouTube channel, I'll go ahead and hand it to you and let you do that.
Well, whoops. Take 2. Humor is really healing, and that's why sometimes I like our system just posts just random hilarious things. It's like it laughter is healing, and I think it's important to do that. But back to social medias. I've got a TikTok. I'm on most of the social platforms, to be honest. But come have a look. So, I don't know, what is my saying about myself? I'm terrible with promoting myself. Look, this is my page. I try and post as regular as I can. Sometimes that's a little sporadic, but I try and share stuff. Wow, that's so unspecific. I've got a YouTube. There's there's a TikTok, there's Instagram. There's a website.
Which I love. I tried to enunciate this in the intro, but it probably still just sounded like I was just saying Australian. But if you're not watching,
the hungry Australian.
Yes, I love that. It's spelled alien, like ALIEN, for people who aren't looking. I thought that was so creative and cute.
It's like a bit of a play on words, so you can probably see a bit more about our gowns on the website too. And there's a fair bit of more information out there. I know we'll talk about this more in the next section, but
And you have started a Substack, which is exciting too, because you're an absolutely brilliant and heartfelt and vulnerable writer. And I think you can have such a big impact on this platform. So even though you just began this and it's something that it's not as established as some of your other social media, I'm going to still put it down in the show notes. It's something we can look forward to going on another journey with you, a writing journey. So I'm really excited that you also started this platform also. Writing is just such a therapeutic way, and it's a really easy way to reach different people who might not be able to watch things as regularly. So I'm really happy that you're on there also. And just thank you, Tarese, for coming on here today, for being vulnerable with us and sharing some of these more unknown aspects of abuse that don't get talked about as much, different cult-ish type environments, high control groups, how abuse can be contained and sort of invisible to the outside world in pockets, and in ways that we don't see talked about as regularly. And for shedding a light on just some taboo topics that I think don't get talked about and get very easily overlooked with, different types of abuse, ritualized or otherwise. Thank you so much. You're an absolute ray of light and a walking miracle. And we're so lucky that we get to hear from you.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. I can't wait to have you back again. So I'll have all of Teresa's information down in the show notes. Please go follow and support. So many of you guys ask what you can do. I know it feels helpless sometimes knowing all this is happening in the world and we're only one person, but you can do a lot as one person. And one of the best ways is just go support the guests on the show. Go follow Terese on YouTube and Substack and TikTok and Instagram. Support her businesses and help share her content and engage with it. Help it raise up in the algorithms. There's a lot of really easy ways that don't cost anything in time or money that we can do to help support, and supporting survivors directly is one of the best ways. So I'll have all of her information in the show notes. I'll have all mine as well, you guys. Thank you so much for listening. Bless you all, and we will see you next time.